Hey y'all, and welcome back to Radical Slice. Eric here. In this installment of my ongoing series to re-implement something like the old NES game Kung Fu, or Spartan Iksu, if you play the Japanese version. Hope you like my katakana pronunciation there. In this episode, I'm going to be adding a new enemy type to kick things off. And so, as you can kind of see from the sprite sheet on the screen here, we've got the tree enemy on the left there, which is sort of like tall and thin, takes up both the high and low spaces. And we've got the flower enemy kind of in the middle, which is short, can only be hit when the player is crouching. And since the player can attack high and low, I also want to add an enemy that can only be hit when the player is standing up and not crouching, when they're doing a high attack. And so the first thing we're going to do is draw that thing and get it implemented, add it into our level format, like our little level parser bit. And we'll go from there. So let me just kick right off with some sprite editing. And by the way, what I'm going for here aesthetically is a sort of a dandelion wisp. That was my idea. Sort of a very like white and gray wispy floating character. Now, I would like to reiterate, as I must do every few episodes, that my pixel art ability is not the best. So I don't know, use your imagination when you see how this thing turns out. Yeah, probably before the next series, I'm gonna try to like hammer away at some pixel art training so that the things will look a little bit nicer. But for now, I'm comfortable with my level. I just wanted to let you know to keep your expectations low. Anyway, let's do some pixel art. Away we go. All right, so I sort of have this like weird, chaotic looking wisp guy where his eyes are all over the place. Actually, I want this eyeball to be up. Yeah, it's a little bit jankier looking. Cool. So we'll just have this thing kind of fly towards the player at height. And he got 3 frames, so super generous for this one. I guess not as generous as the flower. The flower is still the king of animation frames here. All four frames. Look at that. I guess I could add one more wispy frame, but I don't know. I think he's probably good like this. Let me code this guy together. And yeah, I'm just gonna leave the just gonna leave OBS so that the wispy guy is like super big on the left hand side there. This is how it's gonna be. All right, well that worked out surprisingly well. So just code wise, I went back to our level parser and I added this W type. So remember in our level format, there's like the number of enemies and then the type of enemy. So if I want to do 1 tree, 2 flowers, and 4 wisps, that's how I'd write it. So I just wanted to test what the wisps and what they look like. They look pretty goofy. Oh, and I added like a new wisp function. And again, I'm just being like super, I don't know what the word is, super careless. I'm super not paying attention to how many tokens I'm using, right? I'm just kind of plowing ahead, copying and pasting, and going and optimize that all out later. Um, but yeah, added a newest function. The logic is pretty much identical to the flower and the tree. The only thing that's different is actually, I think that's, oh, right, the starting Y position. I just moved it up 8 pixels because I want it to be high up. And when it spawns in, everything looks rad. So let's have a look. So there we go. I'm drawing the bounding boxes so I can see what's going on. They're up high. That's good. the bounding boxes look reasonable. So the sort of lavender, is it lavender? Indigo bounding box is for the hugging of the player, if I remember correctly. Hang on a sec, is it? Yeah, so the lavender boxes are there for just for the player to hit, and then the red boxes are there so that the baddies can kind of stack up against each other. So yeah, this looks good. And if I crouch and punch, oh, if I crouch and kick, I can't actually hit them. Shoot. If I crouch and punch, it'll miss, but apparently the crouching kick will hit them. So we might have to tweak that value a little bit. That's not cool. Let me redraw in the player's kicking box to see what's going on there. Son of a gun. Yeah, it is a little bit higher, isn't it? Okay, so we'll just bring that down 1 pixel. I really feel like I'm playing with fire here, just like, oh, let me just change this magic number. I'm sure nothing bad will happen when I do that. But yeah, okay, so can't punch him, can't kick him. That's good. I'll double check to make sure that it doesn't look weird, that like it looks like it should hit them, but it doesn't. I'm a little bit worried about that. It's probably fine though. Let me drop the bounding boxes and see what it looks like then. Yeah, so actually without the bounding boxes being displayed, it makes a lot of sense, especially because the wisps like don't use the full, like they're wispy. So at the bottom, they're not very corporeal, so it doesn't look like we're impacting them, which is good. So yeah, I think we can probably just keep that as is. It's pretty good. Yeah, so that works the way I would expect. We got all the behavior we wanted. They stack up. They drain the player's health. One thing that is kind of cool that we got for free that I guess I'll just keep is if we mix up wisps with flowers. So let's put a flower in front and wisp in back. They kind of like pile up on top of each other. Pretty cool, right? Didn't even try to do that. That just kind of happened. So yeah, now we have all our baddie types, and we can have the player sort of alternate between go low and go high. And if we space these out well, I think that could be kind of a cool rhythm thing to just go up, down, left, right. And I may play with the attack timings a little bit more to make them more kind of fun and oomphy, if you will. Oop, I got you. I got you. Going down. Oh God. Oh God. Okay. All right. Yeah, so that takes care of the last baddie thing. Let's go back to the spreadsheet. Yeah. All right. So oh yeah, we didn't put this in like high up baddie. Wisp. Oops. Okay. We added that to our scope and we're gonna check it right the heck off. All right, one more tweak before we're done here. Let's go back to Pico-8. And I've been talking about this, I think, since like the first episode or the second episode. But yeah, holding down the button right now just ends up with this sort of like machine gun attack thing, which is not cool. So I want to get that removed. So the way I'm going to handle this is probably whenever there's a button press, it's just going to set some sort of flag on the player. And if that flag is set, it'll ignore other button presses. And the way we'll reset the flag is we'll just check for when there's no buttons being pressed, and then we'll allow the player to like do inputs again. So let me set that up. So right off the bat, I'm just setting this freeze input flag to true whenever the player is reset. So that'll kick in whenever the player dies and whenever they restart a level. As soon as we have a frame where the player is not touching any input and they're not touching any buttons, this flag will be on set anyway. So let me just take care of that now. And I'm going to print this to the screen so I can keep an eye on it. All right, so the combat stuff is done. So now if I hold down the button, he'll only punch once, and you can see up in the upper right, I'm printing the freeze value to the screen. So if I'm holding down the button, it'll stay stuck at freeze. If I let go, it goes to not frozen. Same thing with kick. And with crouch, I had to do something interesting, and I'll explain what in a minute, but same thing. We can't hold the button down and machine gun anymore. We have to just tap it rapidly. So you can still tap it pretty fast, but same thing with kick. So everything looks good. The other interesting thing I had to deal with was the hugged state. Since it was possible if you were hugged to just hold the button down to get out of it with a machine gun punch, now you actually have to tap it like the requisite number of times. That wasn't something that I was exploiting when I was like demoing the game up until now, but it was definitely possible until just now. And now it's not possible anymore. So let's look at the code real quick. Okay, I'm going to leave the highlight on to make these easier to see. So I'm just initializing the player's freeze input to true when they reset it, because I'm going to use that in the level changes in just a minute. That's not in there yet. And then in our big update function, I'm manipulating this value. So remember in the player's update, we check the player's state, and then we sort of call like the sub function for the update to do whatever logic is specific to the player's state at that point in time. But before we do any of that, I'm just checking the input. Now, Pico-8, like up until now, what we've been doing for the buttons is just calling a button with like 3 to check for down, because 3 corresponds to down, or 0 corresponds to, I forget which, I think right. 1 corresponds to the other direction, etc., etc. But if you just call button with no arguments, it gives you back like just a bit mask, basically. It gives you back a number. Where 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think there's 8 of them. I don't remember how many values there are. Hold on. Never mind. It actually returns 14 bits from 0 to 13. So that's weird to think about because there's actually 2 players. But according to the documentation, when button is called without arguments, it returns a bit field of the button states for players 0 and 1. Player 0's buttons are represented by bits 0 through 5. So the player has 6 bits. And then there's like a couple, I guess there's a couple of dead bits in the middle, and then player 1's bits are returned here, a 14-bit number, that very standard integer size. But each player would only have 6 bits to indicate which buttons they were holding down, right? So in our case, this would be like button, actually, we can draw it like this. This is kind of cool, so I'll actually talk about it. Let's talk about binary representation of numbers for a minute. Pico-8 is going to return us back an integer, but we can be, it's easier to think about this integer if we consider it a set as 6 binary flags indicating which of the 6 buttons are held down. So if 1 is held down, we'll get back the binary 1. Or I'm sorry, if left is held down, we'll get back the binary 1. If only right is held down, we'll get back to binary number 10, which corresponds to 2. If somehow the player was holding down both left and right, you get back binary 11, which is 3, and so on and so forth. The interesting thing about this, though, is that if you just check for 0, it only works the way I expected it to when the player is standing up. Let's say, for example, they're crouching, and I punch, right? Then the input is frozen, right? We'll set freeze input to true after the punch. And when I get back to the top here and I check to see if the bit field is 0 or not, it's not 0 because the player is crouching, and so they're holding down the down key. So the actual value that I'm getting back looks like this, right? The D slot would be set to 1, which is the binary value 8. I had a bit of a brain fart and I thought it was 9 for a minute, but I fixed that. So in order to get this right, we want to reset the freeze input button, which means we want to like undo the frozen state if the player is not touching anything or if they're crouching. Crouching is allowed. They can do that, and that will allow them to still punch. So anyway, bringing it all together. Let me comment that out. Save ourselves some algebra later. So if the player is not touching anything or they're just crouching, we're going to reset the freeze input flag to false. So that'll allow them to punch again. Then in the update stand function, where we check to see if the player is touching any buttons, we not only check to see if they're touching the button before switching the state to the antic state, we also make sure that the input is not supposed to be frozen. If it is, we just ignore the button press and move right the heck on. But if the input is not frozen and they're pushing the button, we do what we did before, just switch to the Piantic state. And then we'll freeze our input. We'll set that flag. So if at this point, if the player does not release the input, the input, it's going to remain frozen and they won't be able to punch again, which is what we see when I hold down the key here or when I kick here, right? It stays frozen until I let go of the button. The only other remaining annoyance is the directional keys, which is only really an issue when the player dies or the player changes levels. So let me hold down the left key and die to show you what I mean. Right, we kind of like I'm holding down left this whole time, and as soon as the player respawns, he starts walking again. This isn't as big a deal, and I might even be inclined to let this stay as is, except for what I'm about to show you here, provided I don't die to this tree. Oh, I died. There we go, right there. So as I walk to the end of level 1, I'm walking to the left. And since we're alternating directions on our levels, when I switch to level 2, because we don't have any sort of interstitial thing, I immediately just start walking left if I'm holding down the key still, right? Which is weird. We don't want the player to do that. We want them to be like reorientated to walk to the right. So what I'm going to do is at the end of the level, I'll also freeze the input, and I'll make sure that the player's not allowed to move from the standing state to the walking state while input is frozen. That should be a real quick fix. Let me do that right now. Okay, that was even easier than I thought, thanks to some foresight from previous me. Remember in our main game loop, when we reach the level end, we call player.reset, which makes sense, I guess. And when I set up that input freeze, or the freeze input button, I did it in the reset function here. So we say freeze input true. And then in the update stand, which is the state from which we can transition to the walking state, just like we did for the punch and the kick, we'll also do the same for left and right walking. So this and not player freeze input will prevent the player from going anywhere. I did not put it on button 3, which is the crouch, right? So frozen input does not affect the crouching. I guess it could be weird because you could still like crouch even though you can't walk, but I'm willing to allow that tiny bit of weirdness, just get this thing fixed. So yeah, let's look at how this actually plays out. So if I hold left at the very beginning and I walk into these guys and I die, you'll notice in the upper right hand corner that my input is frozen. I'm still holding down left, but the player is not going anywhere until I release it. So there we go. Similarly here, I'm going to walk to the left and keep holding down left when the level changes. There you go. So you can see my input is still frozen, and I'm still holding down left. And when I let go, we're unfrozen and we can now walk to the right. So there you go. I think that fixes a pretty big input bug. Let me figure out what to do next. So I think I'm going to tweak the levels a little bit to add in some more baddies, and then I think we can start adding like sound. I think I'm about ready to add sound. I feel ready for that now, especially since we've sort of covered everything else in our list here. We can get on with some of the niceties, I think, in our next session. Hey again, thank you all for watching. I really appreciate the time that you've given this channel, and for those of you following along with the series, especially I know it's been longer than I expected the series to be, but so far I like the way things are shaping up. Next time we're going to dive right into sound effects and music. It'll be a slightly different formatted episode, but if that's something you're interested in, again, it's like a new thing for me. So if you're also a beginner at that sort of thing, maybe the episode will be instructive. I hope. I'm going to do my best to make it worth your while. So stay tuned for that. I hope whatever you're working on development-wise or just game plan-wise, that everything's going well. And I'll catch you all next week. Bye for now.